In too grand sweeping narrative of the Second World War, history is measured in armies, battles, and fallen empires. It is a story of immense, impersonal forces. But sometimes, the most profound stories of the war are not found in the grand strategy, but in the smallest, quietest moments of human interaction. A simple gesture of kindness, a shared piece of chocolate, a moment of empathy between a conqueror and the conquered. Most of these moments are lost to time, like whispers in a hurricane. But this is the story of one such moment that refused to be forgotten. It is the story of a young, hungry German boy, living in the ruins of his defeated country, who was shown an unexpected kindness by an American soldier. That single act, lasting only a few minutes, would plant a seed of gratitude so powerful that it would fuel a search across 50 years in an ocean, culminating in one of the most moving reunions imaginable. This is the story of a gift, a memory, and a promise kept across a lifetime. Our story begins in the spring of 1945, in the small German town of Ulzii. The war in Europe was in its death throes. The once mighty Third Reich had crumbled into a landscape of rubble and despair. For the German people, it was a time of profound dislocation and suffering, a period they would come to call Stund 0. The nation was defeated, its cities were destroyed, and its people were starving. For a 9-year-old boy named Hans-Guenther, life had been reduced to a primal, daily search for food. His father was away, a soldier in a war that was now lost. His mother struggled to feed him and his 2 siblings. The official rations were barely enough to sustain life. Hunger was a constant, gnawing presence. Hans-Guenther and his friends would spend their days scavenging, looking for anything edible, their childhood games replaced by the grim business of survival. Then the Americans arrived. The U.S. Army rolled into Ulzii, not as a destructive force, but as an occupying one. For young Hans-Guenther, these soldiers were a strange and intimidating sight. Healthy-looking men in foreign uniforms, driving powerful jeeps and trucks. They were the enemy he had been taught to fear, the conquerors of his homeland. He and the other children would watch them from a safe distance, a mixture of fear, resentment, and intense curiosity in their eyes. The soldiers had food. They had chocolate, chewing gum, and rations that seemed like treasures from another world. The children could only stare, their hunger a tangible ache. Among the American soldiers occupying the town was a 24-year-old from Iowa named Merle Bud Hempel. Hempel was a supply sergeant with the Army Air Forces. He wasn't a frontline combatant, but he had seen the devastation of the war up close. He was a decent, Midwestern man who felt a sense of pity for the defeated populace, especially the children whose lives had been shattered by a war they had no part in starting. One day Hempel and a fellow soldier were on duty when they saw a group of thin, ragged German children watching them. Among them was the small, 9-year-old Hans. The boy was staring intently at the Americans. He wasn't begging, but his eyes betrayed the deep hunger he felt. Something about the boy's quiet dignity struck him. He knew that fraternization with the local populace was officially discouraged, but he was moved by a simple, human impulse. He walked over to his truck, opened a ration can, and pulled out 2 pieces of chewing gum. He knelt down and offered them to the young German boy. Hans-Guenther was stunned. He hesitantly took the gum, a luxury he hadn't seen in years. It was a small gesture, but for a boy living in a world of deprivation and fear, it was monumental. This enemy soldier was not a monster. He was kind. This brief interaction became a silent routine. Whenever Hempel was on duty in that part of town, Hans-Guenther would be there, waiting, watching, and Hempel, seeing the boy, would share a small part of his rations, a piece of chocolate, a biscuit, or more chewing gum. They rarely spoke. Hempel knew no German, and Hans-Guenther knew no English. Their communication was through the simple act of giving and receiving. For Hempel, it was a small way to bring a little bit of humanity into a bleak situation. For Hans-Guenther, these moments were life-altering. The food was sustenance, but the kindness was hope. It taught him that the world was not divided simply into us and them. It taught him that goodness could exist even in the uniform of a conqueror. After a few weeks, Hempel's unit was reassigned. One day, he was simply gone. There were no goodbyes, For Hans-Guenther, the friendly soldier who had shared his food just vanished. But the memory of his kindness did not. That memory became a cornerstone of the boy's post-war understanding of the world. Decades passed. The world changed. Germany rose from its own ashes in an economic miracle known as the Wirtschaftswunder. The hungry little boy, Hans-Guenther, grew up. He became a successful businessman, a husband, and a father. He lived a full and prosperous life in the new, democratic Germany. The American occupation ended, and the United States, once a conqueror, became a vital ally and a friend. But through all these years of change and prosperity, Hans-Guenther never forgot the American soldier. The memory of the man who had knelt down and offered him chewing gum remained vivid and powerful. It was more than just a childhood memory. It was a debt of gratitude that he felt he had never been able to repay. Who was that soldier? What was his name? Did he survive the war and return home? As Hans-Guenther grew older, these questions became more and more important to him. He felt a deep nagging need to find this man and simply say, "Thank you." In the mid-1990s, nearly 50 years after the end of the war, Hans-Guenther, now a man in his late 50s, decided to begin his search. The task was monumental, almost impossible. He had so little information to go on. He didn't know the soldier's name. He didn't know his rank or his unit. All he had was a memory of a face, a uniform, and a location: the town of Alzey, in the spring of 1945. He started by writing to the local German authorities in Alzey, but they had no records of the specific American units stationed there so many years ago. He wrote to American military archives, but without a name or a unit designation. His request was like looking for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. The search seemed hopeless. Many people would have given up, content to let the memory remain a pleasant but anonymous part of their past. But Hans-Guenther was a determined man. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. He decided to reach out to the media. A local German newspaper published his story, the tale of a man searching for an unknown American GI who had shown him kindness half a century earlier. The story was then picked up by Stars and Stripes, the official newspaper of the U.S. Armed Forces. They ran a small article about Hans-Guenther's quest, hoping that perhaps a veteran might remember being stationed in Alzey. The article was read by a man named William Prophet, a U.S. Army veteran living in Virginia. Prophet had served in Alzey after the war. He didn't know the soldier Hans-Guenther was looking for, but he was the head of his local Veterans of Foreign Wars post. He was so moved by the story that he decided to help. He took it upon himself to act as the American point man for the search. Prophet began a painstaking process. He contacted military historical societies and veterans associations. He cross-referenced lists of units that were known to have been in that region of Germany at that specific time. He slowly narrowed the possibilities down. He learned that an Army Air Forces supply and maintenance group had been stationed in Alzey. Hans-Guenther's memory of the soldier not being a front-line infantryman. Prophet then began contacting veterans from that specific group. He would call them up, one by one, these old men now in their 70s and 80s, and ask them a strange question. Were you in Alzey, Germany in 1945? And do you remember giving gum to a little German boy? Most had no memory of such a specific event. It had been a lifetime ago, a small act among a million other memories of the war. But then, one day, Prophet made a call to a man in Dubuque, Iowa. His name was Merle Bud Hempel. When Prophet asked him the question, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Hempel's voice came back, filled with surprise. "Yes," he said. Hempel had never forgotten either. He'd often wondered what had become of the quiet, hungry boy he had shared his rations with. He had kept that memory with him for 50 years. The search was over. Hans-Guenther finally had a name. A reunion was arranged. In 1996, Hans-Guenther flew from Germany to the United States. He traveled to the small town of Dubuque, Iowa, a world away from the ruins of Alzey. There, on a quiet suburban street, two old men met. One was a former American sergeant, the other a former hungry German boy. 51 years after they had last seen each other, they stood face to face. The reunion was profoundly emotional. They didn't need a common language. Embers, tears streaming down both their faces. Hans-Guenther, through a translator, was finally able to say the words he had been waiting half a century to deliver. "Thank you." He explained to Hempel how much that small act of kindness had meant to him, how it had shaped his view of Americans and of humanity for the rest of his life. Hempel was humbled and overwhelmed. He couldn't believe that such a small gesture, an act he had barely thought about at the time, could have had such a lasting and powerful impact on another person's life. They spent several days together, sharing stories, looking at old photographs, and bridging the vast gap of time and experience that had separated them. They were no longer conqueror and conquered, victor and vanquished. They were simply two men, bound by a shared memory of a single, decent act. The story of Merle Hempel and Hans-Guenther is a quiet but powerful ember from the Second World War. It is a story that reminds us that history is not just made in the halls of power or on the battlefield, but in the small, everyday interactions between ordinary people. It proves that a single act of compassion, no matter how small, can ripple through a lifetime, carrying a message of hope and humanity across oceans and decades. It is a testament to the enduring power of a piece of chewing gum, a grateful heart, and a memory that refused to fade.